Hello there, and welcome to NCFE's Top Tips for Teaching Remotely. Today, we're going to take a look at effective feedback. Feedback is a foundational aspect of learning. I've chosen to start with a quote from the economist Stephen Levitt, which reads, "The key to learning is feedback. It is nearly impossible to learn anything without it." And of course, educators have incorporated feedback and very closely related formative assessment in their learning practice for a very long time. And there is a lot of research to show that feedback has more effect on student achievement than any other factor. So clearly it's very important and something to be very aware of. And today we're going to take a look at what we can do to support this important part of learning in the context of remote teaching. Feedback is so important that it can add the equivalent of 2 grades to students' achievement if it's done well, according to the research. So what can we do to make sure that our feedback is as effective as possible? In the context of remote feedback, there are a few considerations that we can make to try and make it as effective as possible. The first thing is to note that voice and video feedback is often perceived more positively than written feedback. So it's really worth making use of this, and your institution VLE or platforms like Blackboard, for example, support voice recording of comments on marked scripts. So this enables you to get that voice and video interaction with students away from the live sessions and in the delivery of individual feedback. So it's definitely worth making use of. It's also important to remember a framing where the learner is competing with the requirements of the task in front of them rather than competing with their peers. While formative in-class quizzes, for example, can be a really good motivational tool, things like Kahoot, they really help harness peer-to-peer competition and motivate engagement with the lesson. But when it comes to individual feedback, this really should be framed such that the learner is competing with the task and not competing with their peers. There are also some well-being implications for this. In general, it's important to keep the feedback non-judgmental and accept where the student is currently at. Keep it task-centered, not ego-centered, and no statements about the learner themselves, for example, no value judgment about the student's ability, but rather concrete ways that they could meet the brief next time. Let's talk about a few more specific ways that this task-centered feedback can be structured. So, formative feedback, it's a very good idea to avoid using grades or marks in formative feedback. Marks and grades can really dampen student motivation, and there's evidence to suggest that if you give a high mark, the learner might feel no need to listen to the information that you want to share with them that accompanies that mark. If you give them a low mark, this can be very deflating and can cause the learner to sink into despair. So getting rid of the marks and giving information is a very good way to improve the quality and effectiveness of your feedback. And making the feedback process collaborative and asking for self-reflection can encourage meta-learning with the student. And a good way to support that self-reflective, collaborative feedback process is through the use of pre-made pro formas. So on the screen is an example of what such a pro forma might look like. And this is a good way to keep the student focused on the areas that you think are important for their progress and for improvement. And this can be supported online through various file sharing platforms, things like Google Docs, where you have the single form, but more than one person can input into the form. And this is good to, especially if you want this self-assessment to be an ongoing part of the formative process. So you access the same form at different points in time to update it as a project progresses, for example. These self-assessment proformas also make it much easier to set goals that are based on the student's past performance. So again, helping you to compare the student's performance to themselves and to keep it focused on the task. Research suggests that the most effective feedback contains these 3 key features. And for a comprehensive summary of that research, you can visit the link on screen, but I'll give you an abridged version here. Goals give a clear and detailed picture of what the student should aim to achieve, and they give a concrete, specific example of what success actually looks like. Medals are an acknowledgement of how far the student has already come on the way to that goal and recognises the achievements that they've already made on the learning journey. And finally, missions are specific areas of improvement, specific things that must be done in order to reach the goal that they're striving towards. So, for example, a goal might be to produce a well-formed writing that clearly communicates a view about eating, for example. And one medal that the student might have already achieved is a good grasp of the issues, appropriate vocabulary. But their mission could be to work on their punctuation and their use of grammar. So this rubric is very helpful in formulating your feedback and making sure that it has those key features that are so good for supporting student success. The key takeaways then for today's top tips are that effective feedback improves learning, and in fact, good feedback is foundational to learning. It's sort of what learning is made of. A good thing to remember is goals, medals, and missions. And remember to involve the student in self-reflection and make their success a collaboration that they are actively involved in. This is an acknowledgement that learning is really the result of the activity of the student rather than just what the teacher is imparting. I hope you found today's session useful. Thanks very much for your time.